Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm in the virtual company of Oyinkan Braithwaite, and I have to tell you that I did a little swoon when I heard we'd be chatting. Okay, a big swoon. A few years ago, I fell hard and fast for Oyinkan's debut novel, My Sister the Serial Killer, a thriller that was as darkly funny as it was fresh and fierce. And so did the rest of the world. In 2019, My Sister the Serial Killer won the LA Times Award for Best Crime Thriller, the Morning News Tournament of Books, the Amazon Publishing Readers Award for Best Debut Novel, and the Anthony Award for Best First Novel. I won't even tell you about the short lists. Or the long lists. The book is also being translated into 30 languages and has been optioned for film. Prior to that, Oyinkan, a graduate of creative writing and law from Kingston University, had published poetry and short stories, worked as an assistant editor at a Nigerian publishing house, and freelanced as both a writer and graphic artist. Then, the little book she wrote for herself became a global phenomenon. Her newest, Treasure, is one of 6 shorts featured in the Amazon Original Stories collection Hush, available digitally and on audio July 30th. Here's the elevator pitch. Treasure is a wannabe Instagram influencer in Lagos, Nigeria. She shows off a luxurious life in a gated community that her almost 5,000 followers can only dream of. Show for Sure is determined to be part of it. The macho mechanic is Treasure's #1 fan, and double taps and blushing emojis are no longer enough. He needs to meet her in the flesh. If only Treasure were more prepared for destiny. Prepare yourselves, friends. We're about to take a trip all the way to Nigeria, where Oyinkan Braithwaite will have you swooning too. Here we go. Today I am in conversation with Oyinka Braithwaite, who is the author of a great new short story, Treasure, which is featured in the upcoming Amazon collection Hush. And of course, you know her as the author of My Sister the Serial Killer as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. As I was telling you before we started recording, when your name was thrown into this mix for our interview segment, I did a little swoon. I said, oh, I don't get starstruck all that often anymore, but you kind of did it for me. So I'm
Thank
really
you.
honored to be in your virtual presence today. So I figured I would start by asking you about this new short story, Treasure, which I think people are really going to enjoy. And of course, you know, the title, Treasure, is also the name of your main character. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about her aspirations as an Instagram influencer and how that sort of motivates her throughout the story.
Yes, so I mean, I feel like more and more, I suppose I'm in that in-between age where, when I was really young, we didn't have mobile phones, there was no social media. I don't even think there was internet. And then at some point, all of these things just happened. So, it's still sort of weird for me, maybe not as weird as it would be for my parents, but it's still sort of weird for me that people would aspire to be Instagram influencers and that's your job description. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it still takes some getting used to that, like your job is to be an influencer, and what does that mean? And if you aspire to be that, what does that require of you? Because obviously you're a public figure then, but you're not a public figure in the way that somebody can point to what you do. They're different. They're influencers who are obviously, like, the younger they are, I feel like their values are also tend to be on the shallow side. So I wanted to, because this is something that interested me a bit with My Sister the Serial Killer as well. I touched on it a little bit, just that perfection that people like to pretend that they have, the perfect house, the perfect food, the perfect partner, and just building this life for yourself that may or may not be, at least for not so much for yourself, but for the public, that may or may not be true. So that's sort of what my main character is doing.
Sure, and I wanted to ask you about that because the overall, theme to this collection seems to be our idea of truth and the distortion of truth, and trying to uncover the truth and how, social media and technology can really complicate that process. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to social media and how it sort of perpetuates our constituting, sort of a false narrative where there's this whole reality versus appearance perception.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating. Even of late, I feel like we've all sort of become um politicians, and we we're careful what we say and how we say it and how we look and how you're presenting an image, and everybody's doing it. The truth is everybody's doing it. If you're on social media, I mean, even those people who say, oh, everything's raw, no filter, they're presenting a type of image as well. Their image is that, I'm real, I'm down to earth. We're all doing it. And I think that's fascinating because obviously, even when someone is bearing their soul, how much are they really bearing? How much practice have they done beforehand? We don't know. And like you said, it's so hard now to tell the difference between what's true and what's not when it comes to social media. You're following someone, you think they have the best relationship you've ever seen, you want your relationship to be like that, and then you find out that none of it is real. And what does that do to you as well as the viewer, as the follower? I think it's all really interesting.
Yeah, I was talking to a counselor recently who wrote a book on anxiety for teenagers, and one of her big things was, our connection to our devices and how we're
Yeah.
always seeing, the image that somebody wants to put forth. And then, of course, everybody puts perfection online, even though that's not necessarily the reality. And so it's kind of exhausting for them because they have to
Gosh,
keep
John,
up
um I don't know how teenagers are handling it, because I know that sometimes I get anxiety, and I'm in my 30s and I'm mostly like at peace with who I am and where I am and everything that's going on in my life. I'm pretty happy, and sometimes I get anxiety because you look at someone and they're like, oh, bought a house at 21, and I'm like, okay. Or you just, and some of these, and you're happy for them, but I can just imagine if you were going through a tough time, or your life isn't, you might look at that and think, what did I do wrong? Where did my life go off the rails? What if you're 40 and you're looking at someone who's 20 saying she has everything she's ever wanted and more? And the truth is, in the past we were exposed to this, but very little. Like, it was magazines and you really didn't know what was going on with anybody, but now you're exposed to it every second, every minute of every day.
No, it's true. And it's like you constantly are either, comparing yourself or feeling bad because you don't live up to somebody's created image. But I did
Yeah.
want to ask you, there's sort of another character in the story who's pretty much known just through his Instagram handle, which is Show for Sure. And he, meets Treasure online, and he in his mind makes a connection with her based on the things that she posts. So can you talk a little bit about him? Because he thinks that he's very different from her. It's sort of that clash of dynamic and class and economy, perhaps. And so he really wants to make a connection with her, and that is sort of the driving force on the collision course that becomes this story. Can you just speak to his character briefly?
Yeah, I mean, Treasure and at Show for Sure, they're probably a little bit more similar than they realize. But at Show for Sure, definitely wants a better life for himself. And I think he's that person who is seeing, to some extent, he's seeing, he wants to make a connection. I think he wants to improve his life. He wants to make a connection. And most people don't give him the time of day. So I think it's that, just, again, you're looking at something on social media and you're believing it's real, as you would if you weren't exposed to it as often as most of us are now. Like, now I think we're all a bit jaded. We're like, really? But if you're exposed to it, or if you're young, you might believe everything you see. And I think that he's seeing this beautiful life, and that's what he's decided he wants for himself.
Sure, and I really thought it was clever, that you basically just referred to him as his handle, because that really does embrace that idea of anonymity. And just because we think that we know somebody because we see them through a screen, we really don't. Like, I can see you right now, but I don't really know you. I
Yeah.
think, but I do.
I mean, I totally agree. I think you know, sometimes you fall in love, no, and I don't mean in love, but you come to love a person um via, again, how they presented themselves. You think, oh, this person could be my friend, or this person, I would really get on with this person. But like you said, do you really know that person?
Yeah, it's interesting because so many people, said don't meet your idols because you have these great expectations, and a lot of times, unfortunately, you're very disappointed. I've been, I guess, very
Yeah.
fortunate not to have had that experience. Most of the people I've really admired and met have been wonderful, but I can see how if that weren't the case, that could really, be disappointing. I do want to ask you quickly because, you are an author with a platform now and a lot of people looking towards you, and obviously promotion and marketing for books and stories has changed, and you're really expected, to have a media presence. Even if that's not necessarily something that you're comfortable with. And I feel like, people have to be very cautious because say one wrong thing or something misconstrues something, that can be very damaging. So what is your relationship to social media?
um I don't know. I think I sort of have a love-hate relationship with it. I'm mostly on Instagram more than anything else. And I think it's because I'm a very visual person. And I like the fact that you can sort of create a portfolio of a kind in on Instagram. So I treat it more like a work thing more than anything else. I don't have anything interesting to say, so Twitter is not really for me. I pop in and out,
Sure.
but Instagram is more. But I do have, there are times when I feel like, okay, you need to take a break now. You can't sort of get swallowed up in the world. And like you said, also the expectations. Like I get a lot of messages now, and sometimes I feel guilty that I can't respond, or but there's only so much. Like if it came down to it, you would be like holding onto your phone throughout the day. So
Right.
you kind of need to own your own mental health and the time and space you have to leave for yourself, and to do. Another author once told me that this isn't real life. Like everything that happens around, like, to say the success of your book isn't real life. And more and more I think about what she said, because you may start to think you're this person, or I don't know, you may start to sort of get wrapped up in, oh, I'm getting these requests, and this is happening, and I've got fans and I've got readers and people want my attention. But you still have to be present in your normal day-to-day life. You still have to do your laundry, you still have to cook, you have to look after your kids if you have them. That's actually more your life than what's going on in the digital world.
Sure, and people just aren't going to show up and wash your dishes for you as much as you might like to, have that happen. But I think that's a great point. And also, too, as much as we all want your attention, we also want your books and your stories and your words. And of course, that's something that you have to fit into your day as well
Yeah,
because they
yeah,
don't always help.
time. Like, I think the weirdest thing about being like, what I didn't anticipate, and sometimes like saying it to people, I know that it doesn't sound real, but I can genuinely say I'm busy and not be writing. And it's true, I'm busy with writing related things, but to get the time to write is a problem, to get the time to do something else is a problem. But until you're in it, you can't appreciate what the person means. It just feels like, oh, she thinks she's busy. But it's actually a lot of work.
Oh, I know. I feel like now writing the book is just the beginning, and it's like great, the book is done, but now you have to, promote it everywhere. It is a lot. But I did want to ask you, so Treasure is a short story. You've written several short stories, a full-length novel. Can you talk about the difference between writing longer form fiction versus shorter form, and whether or not you have a preference for one or the other?
Um, I, 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 gosh, I think I have a preference for short stories just because it's easier. And I say it's easier because, not necessarily because the form is easier, but it requires less of a commitment. So when I'm writing a short story, it's like, okay, I can play around more. I feel like I can experiment more. There's some things, um, I feel bolder. I've noticed noticed, like, I'm bolder when it comes to short stories. I'm more likely to try a new style because I know I don't have to do it for 70,000 words. Like, I know I don't have to do it for 100 plus pages. So I feel like, okay, I can do this and I can do that. So I always kind of equate short stories to having a fling, because you'll have fun with the person, but there's nothing, you're not committed to the person. Whereas novels give me anxiety attacks, like real, because I don't know if what I start I'm going to be able to finish.
Sure.
So I feel like that's almost like getting married. You've got to be sure this story is the one. And I've been sure so many times, and and then I don't finish the work. So it gives me more. It's more rewarding though, but it definitely gives me more anxiety.
Sure, sure. And can I ask you too? I know that you're also a poet, and that you have to really capture a lot of emotion and description in a few short words. A lot of times, do you find that background helps in your story writing, or are they completely separate to you?
No, I think it does. They feed into one another. I mean, I don't write poetry as much as I used to be honest, but I think it taught me um, about brevity, taught me about making deliberate choices with your words and with your sentence structure. And it's something that I always think about when I even writing longer, even with the novels, I think about how does this word, like when you say it, how does it flow out of your mouth, that sort of thing.
Sure, and I would say just from having read some of your work, I feel like there's definitely an economy of words there, but I think that actually makes it more powerful because you're able to drive your point home really quickly and effectively. And also, you mentioned that you're a very visual person, and I know that you do, a lot of graphic design. So do you find that, that type of artistic eye, does that help you when you're visualizing scenes for your stories or your books, and is that helpful in sort of rendering it on the page?
Um, I think it kind of it's odd. I don't have my memory is terrible, so I kind of have to be looking at something to be able to describe it. So I've noticed, like, if I want to describe a room, I have to be looking at a room almost. I have to be, if I want to describe a street, I have to look out the window. I'm not very good at just recalling things. So I think that's where the visual part comes in. If anything, it's an impediment. It's not helpful to me, but I really think I have to see it to be able to describe it. I can't just call it up or imagine something really creative. I don't tend to sketch stuff out. I'll look for on Google until I find, if I can't find it in my immediate surroundings, I'll look for on Google for a reference.
Sure. And so I did want to ask you as well. So you actually studied creative writing at university, and I don't know if I'm opening Pandora's box here or not. But I know that there are sort of, different perspectives on how actually studying writing in a school setting can, influence you. So I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what is it that can be taught? What is intrinsic talent to the person, and how does sort of tenacity or discipline inform that equation?
Um, so this argument is really interesting because I think it's odd that writers, I mean, artists are allowed to go to school to study art, and writing is just another type of art. Also, I think what going to university or whatever, doing a course won't do for you is it won't give you, in my opinion, creativity as far as plots and things like that. Life, there's some things that it's life and what you've been through and the way your mind works, that's it. But going to study it formally will teach you style. It will teach you prior to, I did my course at Kingston University, and prior to that, there were some things I just wasn't really aware you could do. They expose you to writers who have tried different things. You try different things. I think it just opens your mind, and you read books maybe you wouldn't normally have picked on your own. And I'm for that, like being exposed to different genres, different, as an individual, a lot of us just stick to what we like, and that's it. But even if you're going to only write in a particular genre, it's good to know how did another genre do this, or how did another writer do this, and then you can figure out what you want to incorporate. So I think it does that, and then also feedback. Writing is such a solitary art form, so it allows you to, you know, learn about maybe things that might be weaknesses for you, what your strengths are, and how to build on that. Like I think I learned at university that dialogue was one of my strengths. um, so so yeah, things like that. You know, I don't think it's a do or die affair. You can be a good writer, obviously, without going to university, but without doing a formal course on it. But you have to be prepared to expose yourself, I think.
Sure. I think that's a great point. And I wanted to ask you too, you have a really interesting background, I find, with that and the poetry, but you worked in a Nigerian publishing house as an assistant editor. And I'm just, when you get exposed to that side of the business, I think it can probably be both a help and a hindrance because you understand the realities of what it is to be published and how difficult it can be to actually be successful. So can you talk about, what you took from that experience and how there may have been both, the good and the bad in seeing that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one thing it definitely showed me was that I really did want to be published abroad, outside of Nigeria, because I know you know, even though I had suspected, being in the publishing industry showed me how constrained the Nigeria publishing industry was, how little money the industry has here. And I've always intended to be a full-time writer, so I knew I needed to be able to make money from it. That was very important for me. So it taught me that. And also how little the slush pile was kind of looked at.
Right.
Because again, it's an industry that doesn't have a lot of resources at its so I think, yeah, but also because I was an assistant editor, it improved my editing skills as well. So I'm better able to edit myself. But also, like I said, I did creative writing. My courses almost like A levels was literature. So I've been constantly improving on my work and my ability to look at my work objectively. So I think being an editor also enabled me to do that.
Sure. And so I think that sort of lends itself to my next topic of discussion. I warned you that I might ask you just a couple questions about my sister, the serial keeper, which everybody knows and loves. But first of all, just sort of more broadly, because that was such a successful breakout novel, in a general sense, how has that changed your life?
Well, I mean, it's changed my life in the sense that, I finally was able to achieve my life goal. That was pretty much the only thing I was praying to God for. I wanted to be published. I wanted to be a full-time writer, and my sister, the serial killer, has enabled me to be a full-time writer because, the book did well, and so, I get other opportunities off of that book. So, I'm so thankful to my agents, my editors, to everybody who was involved in making it what it is now. But in terms of my day to day, not that much has changed. I have more money in my pocket, but aside from that, like my life is pretty much the same. Sorry?
And more deadlines, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've got, yeah, but but other than that, yeah, not much has changed. People don't Writers aren't, unless you're like J.K. Rowling or Stephen King or something. Writers aren't, in my Ochimamanda, writers aren't celebrities in the same sense. It's not as if,
Right.
yeah, things are pretty much the same.
I know, talk about a myth, right? The rich and famous author. Not so much. It's a lot of work, especially these days. It's not easy to do
Yeah.
that full time. But I did want to ask you too, because if I understand Correctly. My Sister the Serial Killer really was a book that ultimately, you decided to write for yourself and you thought that it was going to have a very small platform and limited exposure. And that obviously turned out not to be the case. But, I'm sure a lot of people ask you for, your advice to aspiring or up and coming writers. And would it be to write for yourself or something else?
No, it would be to write for yourself. I usually say write first, worry later, because one thing that this whole experience taught me is that you're not always the best judge of how people, you don't know how people will receive something. All you can do is do your best and make sure it's the cleanest work, and you've been true to the story, you've done your best by the story. That's really all you can do. There's no predicting, there's no trend, because that's something else I learned as well, that the publishing timeline between when they, and I heard mine was pretty fast, but it was a year between when they signed me on and when the book was published. Sometimes it can be 2 years. So by then, whatever trend you thought you were on might have been done and dusted, and so you've got to be, like you say, you've got to be true to yourself, and I think you shouldn't overthink it.
Sure, and it's funny that you mentioned that because so many people think, oh, the vampire book is hot right now, or the werewolf book, I'm going to write one. And it's like by the time you're done, the trend is over because the trend was,
Yeah.
a year or two before you realized.
Yeah, unless I guess if your publishing industry decides to push industry, if your publishing house decides to push so that they can jump on it, I suppose some might do that, but otherwise, you'd be playing a risky game.
Sure. And just a couple quick questions specific to my sister, my sister, the serial killer, if you don't mind. But really, the heart of the story is, two sisters, one of which obviously is a serial killer, and the other sister is sort of the cleanup person. And they are Corday and Iola. And I'm just wondering if you can talk about what inspired you to explore that dynamic between sisters, because I think that on the one hand, siblings tend to be very competitive with one another, but then they're also very protective of one another when they're sort of an outside threat. And you yourself have siblings. I'm not saying that, any of you are criminals, but I'm sure you were able to, draw on that experience to create very vivid characters.
Yeah. Initially I wasn't planning to do it about sisters. I was going to do it about friends, because I'd written a poem like 10 years earlier, which was kind of similar in plot, and it was two friends. But when I started My Sister the Serial Killer, I had grown as a writer, I'd grown as a human being, and looking at it, I decided for this, and the story was a bit different. So looking at it, I thought, yes, there are friends who might kill for one another, or but I wanted I wanted to put Corriday between a rock and a hard place, and family is very hard to escape, even when you try. I've come across one or two people who have stopped talking to members of their family or whatever, and I see how it haunts them. It's not an easy separation at all, no matter what the person has done or not done to you or whatever. So I wanted it to feel like Corriday can't escape. I wanted to make it very hard for her to, and like I said, the relationship with the sibling can be really complex. My sister serial killer is a bit of an exaggeration, but I definitely do understand that you can simultaneously love and want to strangle your sibling. So I suppose that's why I went for it.
Sure, sure. And just a couple more questions, and then I'll let you get back to it because I'm sure somebody somewhere is thinking, type, you have words. But I did want to ask you too. Your books have a lot of dark humor in them and your stories, and I think that can be great for offsetting tension. So can you talk a little bit about how you're able to employ humor in your books and how you know whether or not something works? Because I feel like humor can be tricky. It either hits or it falls completely flat, and you're great at nailing it, but I'm sure that's a fine balance.
I don't know. I think the first thing is I'm never trying to be funny. So it probably says something about me. I think I have a weird way of looking at things, but I also think that I'm not trying to depress anybody, but I do like to engage in some topics. So I try to keep it light, and sometimes I make it quite matter of fact. And the truth is that sometimes things are funny and tragic at the same time. They can sometimes be both. So it's to look at. I'm trying to think of what an example would be. Okay, so in My Sister the Serial Killer, there's a scene where Korede talks about these downfall buses. So we have buses in Nigeria. They're called downfall buses, and they're not like buses in the I don't know that much about buses in the States. I mean, when I was there, I don't remember. I didn't really take buses, but in the UK, where you enter, you tap your oyster or whatever, you sit on your seat, and you can see the destination on the thing. They're not like that here. Here, you it's very rough, and they shout the destination at you, and then you get on, and then at some point somebody comes to collect money. And people are squashed in to try and fit as many people, because the conductors want to make and the driver wants to make as much money as possible. So apparently, and they drive like maniacs. So apparently one of these buses had had an accident and driven into the water, off the bridge and into the water, and like everybody died. And according to my mom, I put it in the story, don't know if it's true, but according to my mom, then the other downfall buses that were going in the general direction started to shout. So normally they would shout destinations. So let's say your destination is London. From Birmingham, they would be like, London, London, going to London, or whatever. But they started shouting like we're going into the river, like going to the river. Like, I don't know what it was. It really kind of, I don't know. People have a weird sense of humor, but I thought that was hilarious. That's what they were saying. Obviously, they weren't going into the river, but I don't know if they were keeping things light, because maybe they know that it's a risky business they're in, or I don't know what it was. But I think that you can sort of find those weird nuggets, people doing weird things as response to tragic circumstances.
No, I think that's so true. I always tell people, like, when you can't laugh anymore, that's when you know you're in trouble, and that's like when the insanity sets in. But as long as you can laugh, you're probably going to be okay. All right, so last two questions. I did want to ask you, the story Treasure and also My Sister, the Serial Killer are set in Nigeria. And I know you've talked a lot about how, because you use that as a setting and you've lived there, that people oftentimes make the assumption, that you're an expert on Africa or African literature, and you wouldn't yourself, say that. So can you, again, I guess we're coming back to appearances versus reality, but can you talk about why you do choose to use Nigeria as a setting, and why that really works for a story like My Sister, the Serial Killer, whereas in America with our forensic technology, it probably wouldn't?
Yeah, I choose Nigeria because I'm in Nigeria right now. And like I said before, it's easier for me to, base things on where I am. I lived in London for a very long time, but to recall half the things, like when I'm there, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to write about this. And then once I'm out of London, I'm like, yeah, it seems troublesome to try and remember all those details. So if I was in London, I'd probably write about Black characters in London or whatever. So that's why there's really nothing. But when I was doing My Sister the Serial Killer, which actually, it's only very recently that I started writing. A lot of the time, my characters tend to be no man's land. Like, you can't really pin where they are. So it's just recently where I became more confident writing characters in Lagos. I was always worried that, again, because I've been in and out, I was always worried people wouldn't feel like people in Nigeria wouldn't feel like my depiction of Nigeria was accurate. But now I've kind of gotten over that. So, and when I was writing My Sister the Serial Killer, which was my first no, it wasn't my first novel based in Nigeria, but when I was writing My Sister Serial Killer, I realized it was perfect because, like you said, I didn't have to deal with, like, sometimes people ask me, like, what research did you do? And I'm like, thankfully, I didn't have to do all that much because my criminals aren't faced with as sophisticated a system. So it made my job a lot easier setting it here.
Sure, and I have to say, in the news story, I really liked Show for sure. He's in this very posh neighborhood, and he decides that he wants to have a house that's orange and yellow with a green roof. And man, I want that house too. Those are like my colors. I would love
The
that.
thing is
Um,
about I live in an estate as well. I wish I could. It's too much trouble. I'm so lazy, but I live in an estate. Do you want to see? Should I turn? I don't know if you want to see through the window. That's good. Okay, don't worry. Let's not stop the interview. But houses are built in the estate constantly, um, and because there's no real like, I mean, different estates have different rules, but with ours, there's no real rule about aesthetic. So you really do get different colors, different shapes, different. Sometimes you can see like an English influence in a home. Sometimes you can see a Spanish influence. Sometimes you can see there's one house that I'm pretty sure they imitated a Roman temple. So, you know, people just do whatever they want. It's their home, they're building it. So
Sure, I kind of like it. All right, so last question to you. If you choose to answer it or not, I know some people are a little bit superstitious about this, so if you want to take a pass, you can take a pass. But I'm wondering if you have anything upcoming that you would like to tease for your readers. And when I say your readers, I basically mean me because I want to know what you're working on.
um yeah, so I'm looking for time. I've got, aside from aside from Treasure, I've got a quick reads piece coming up out in February, which is like a novella, so probably be like this size, I don't know. So that's supposed to be like an easy read for people who don't read a lot, or people who have had trouble with their literacy and things like that. So it's not a complicated, but I think it's a bit fun. I think it's fun. I don't know. I haven't gotten enough distance from it yet. That's why it sounds so doubtful. It's still so recent. But yeah, but I'm looking forward to when it comes out, and then hopefully soon I'll be able to like focus on finishing, because that's my challenge, on finishing the story.
Sure, sure. Well, that's all right. You're keeping us in suspense, but we, I'm sure, have a lot to look forward to. So I will thank you so much for doing this interview, and I'm going to stop
Thank
recording in a minute so you can
you.
show me the view from your window.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here, and best of luck with the new story.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.